This is Charles Brewer, President of the Civil War Study Group here at Lake of the Woods, Virginia. Welcome to the recording of our program on June 27th, 2025.
Thanks, Charles, and thank everybody for coming. I am very, very pleased to introduce Dr. Rob Havers. He's a military historian who is President and Chief Executive Officer of the American Civil War Museum in Richmond. Prior to coming to the museum in March 2021, Dr. Havers served as president of the Pritzker Military Museum and Library in Chicago. He was the president of the George C. Marshall Foundation in Lexington, Virginia at the Virginia Military Institute, director of the National Churchill Museum at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, where Churchill delivered his Iron Curtain speech. And he has taught at Oxford University, the London School of Economics, Westminster College, and the United Kingdom's Royal Military Academy. If you haven't been to the museums in Richmond and Appomattox, I hope you will be super excited to go after hearing Dr. Havers reflect on the past, present, and future of the Civil War and the American Civil War Museum. Please welcome Dr. Havers.
Steve, thank you very much. Can you all hear me in the back? Okay, I'll pin this on here, and it may or may not help. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. It's great to see you all, great to be here today. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the American Civil War Museum. Anyone been to Richmond and been to any of our sites? Oh, excellent. That's very good. I'm glad to see and hear that. And if you have not, hopefully what I am about to say will encourage you to come along and pay us a visit. So what I'm going to talk about today is really the what, the why, and the how of the American Civil War Museum, and how we endeavor to keep interest in the American Civil War alive today in the 21st century. So what is the American Civil War Museum? It is an amalgamation of two much older organizations. The first one on the left, the Museum of the Confederacy, that opened its doors in 1896. The collection that is part of the American Civil War Museum collection comes overwhelmingly from that antecedent organization, and it is probably one of the best, if not the best, collections of Civil War artifacts on the planet, rivaled probably by the Mollis collection at Gettysburg. Most of the items given to the Museum of the Confederacy over that long tenure were given either by the veterans themselves or their nearest and dearest. So the provenance of those pieces is astonishing. So it's a combination of the old Museum of the Confederacy and a newer entity, the American Civil War Center, that sat at Tredegar, on the site of the Tredegar Iron Works, from the late 1990s and early 2000s. So these two organizations came together in 2013 to create what we believe to be something that is greater than the sum of those constituent parts. The American Civil War Museum, with three constituent parts, museum at Appomattox. We still own the White House of the Confederacy, from which Jefferson Davis directed the war. That's on Clay Street, right in the heart of Richmond. And part of the impetus for coming together in 2013 was to build a brand new museum to house that fantastic collection. And that is what we have at Tredegar. And that museum opened in 2019, so it's still comparatively new. So Tredegar, the Iron Works, one of the principal armaments producers for the Confederacy during the war. There'd been an ironworks on that site from the 1830s, finally closed in the 1950s, and the new museum we have umbrellas some of the ruins of that ironworks. We like to think that it visually indicates what it is the American Civil War Museum is good at, which is remembering the past, but doing it in a fashion that excites and engages contemporary visitors. So the glass and steel umbrellas those brick ruins. And of course the White House of the Confederacy. If you've been to that recently, and it's been in this position for quite some time, It's hemmed in very heavily by VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University's health complex. So you really have to want to navigate what seems to be endless construction in and around that location. But this year, and testament to the interest in this property, this year our visitation goals for this building are exceeding budget. So people are still fascinated by this property and still fascinated by the Civil War, and it is dressed with contemporary artifacts to reflect the tenure of the Davis family in that house. And of course we have our site at Appomattox, built just before the coming together of the two museums. It's quite a large museum in and of its own right, just to the west of the courthouse NPS site. So why is the Civil War important? Why is the study of the Civil War? I would like to think this is an audience that does not really need to know that, but I often speak to people who wonder why we should care. Well, the Civil War still matters to Americans in the 21st century, and so it should. It's really the conflict that remakes this nation. The world we live in, the United States we live in today, is recognizable in what emerges at the end of the Civil War. The Civil War, of course, directly responsible for 3 constitutional amendments, and also significant for another reason. You heard from my resume that originally, and I still am, I'm a military historian. So military history writ large. 20th century, in all honesty, was my area of expertise. But casualty figures are something I'm pretty familiar with from all different battles and all different wars. One of the statistics I always like to share with lay audiences, so probably not an audience like you, but it's worth underscoring, is that if you add US casualties in the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, Spanish-American War, Mexican War, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Shield and Desert Storm, Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, all of those US casualties in all those conflicts are still less than Americans killed in the Civil War. That's an astonishing demographic significance. And this vignette, this little display, we have in the museum at Tredegar, and that always brings home to people what is the demographic impact of any war. The United States, of course, in the 1860s is much, much smaller. The comparative casualty figures would be, on a United States population of about 35 million, 7 million dead in contemporary terms, which is an astonishing figure. So the impact of the Civil War is with us still demographically. So how do we do all this? How do we bring it to life? We have started to think about looking at the Civil War through the lens of 3 discrete positions: the causes of the war, the course of the war, and the consequences of that conflict. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about how history has been under assault in this country and beyond in recent years. One of the ways we deal with it, I'll come on to, but there is a great aphorism that underpins what it is we do. And that aphorism says that history is written backwards, but lived forwards. And the point of that is to suggest that everyone who goes through a war, they have no idea how it's going to turn out. Yet when a historian sits down to write a book, he knows what the final chapter is going to say. So we try and interpret things in, for example, our principal exhibition, A People's Contest, from the perspective of those that went through the war. No one thought it was going to be a long war. No one really imagined that it was going to lead to emancipation, as you all know. So that perspective is the perspective that we begin our permanent exhibition with or from, and that's at Tredegar. in this image here, you can see a portion of that tremendous collection of artifacts that we possess. This piece is, or this display is building a war machine, and it narrates how it is that the United States Army, from a very small standing force, grows to be an army of 2 million plus men, and the Confederacy too, from no standing army other than militias and that sort of thing, builds a massive, great fighting force. We have 15,000 three-dimensional pieces in our collection. There are, let me go back, 15,000 three-dimensional pieces. We are collecting still. We just signed an agreement to bring to the museum items from a private collector in the Shenandoah Valley who had a Union naval uniform. It's very rare, and lots of Union naval artifacts. So we're actively collecting as well as preserving. Got a few pieces from the collection, sort of my own personal, in part, favorite items. We have remnants of the flag that flew above Fort Sumter. Survived the war incredibly, but these items speak to the beginning of the war. We have the diaries of two brothers who served in the conflict, one Confederate, one a Union soldier, thereby demonstrating the schism that a civil war inevitably engenders. Divides a nation, but it also divides families, and it divided brothers in this case. And the brothers, you can see on there, both of them survived the war. We also have a slave identification tag. Very, very, very rare indeed. This is one of the most fascinating, I think, pieces we have in our collection. It is a glass vial used in pharmaceutical endeavors in the Civil War period. Inside it is a coded message, and you can see on here, from General Walker to General Pemberton at the siege of Vicksburg, dropped in the mud, forgotten for 100 years, rediscovered. Museum of the Confederacy undertakes to open the glass bottle and read the message. They heat the glass to get the message out. It's in code, it's encrypted. They go to the NSA, amongst other organizations, to break the code. And the message is, as you can see in the bottom here, General Pemberton, you can expect no help from us. So it doesn't change the siege of Vicksburg. Pemberton, as you know, surrenders. People often say to me, can history be rewritten? Well, broadly, no. But if new evidence emerges, there can be a different perspective to it. And this piece here is fascinating. Imagine how that message said, General Pemberton, hang on, help is on its way. Probably unlikely, but that's a different complexion to those events, those pivotal events, all those years ago. We started with these items with the remnants of the flag that flew over Fort Sumter, the alpha, if you like, of the Civil War artifacts we possess. This is the Omega, Alpha to Omega, the Greek alphabet, the pen that Robert E. Lee used to sign the surrender documents in Appomattox, Virginia, when he sat down with General Grant in 1865, on display at our museum in Appomattox. So I like to think that handful of artifacts from 15,000 artifacts is emblematic of that wonderful collection. I mentioned a couple of recent donations. These are some other pieces that came in too. A Union shell jacket and a wonderful collection of pristine firearms from somebody in Atlanta, Georgia. Collected them his entire life. His was downsizing and thought of the American Civil War Museum, and they came to us. So if any of you have pieces you're looking for a good home for, ultimately we preserve everything in perpetuity. 150,000 or so works on paper, 150,000 documents, all of it in a discrete collection now resident at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, where they are also digitizing it all to bring it out to new generations. One of our famous artifacts, a blood-stained letter from a soldier wounded in Spotsylvania courthouse, attesting to the reality of war and of conflict. Astonishing that we have that in the collection, in all honesty, that it survived that long. And also some other highlights from the works on paper: the Provisional Constitution of the Confederate States of America, the original document. Also a sales receipt for an enslaved person. Again, very, very, very rare indeed. That's Bella Jenkins, who was the slave for whom that receipt spoke to. So how do we do all this? How do we bring history to life? How do we keep the Civil War relevant? Every year, the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History awards a prize to the best new work in Civil War history. They call it the Lincoln Prize. 2 years ago, Jonathan White won that prize. This year, so every year we bring the winner to come and speak at our Tredegar site, speak in Richmond. This year, Dr. Etta Fields Black won an award for her book on Harriet Tubman and the Combahee River Raid. In the interim between us signing the agreement for her to come and speak, she won the Pulitzer Prize for this book. So we were delighted to get a Pulitzer Prize winner to come along as well. October 15th, if you can make it, it should be a great evening. We like to, as well, bring people into the museum. Tredegar site is a wonderful location, and you can see here with our Christmas tree event, you can see in the background the remnants of the ironworks itself. And we have a whole array of speaker programs at Tredegar and also at our Appomattox site. One of the things we are most proud of is teacher education and bringing school groups to the museum. Commonwealth of Virginia has been a generous supporter of our education efforts. Nearly 10,000 plus school children this year at all three sites come to see the Civil War Museum and to hear about the Civil War. And what we find with school groups especially is that in a museum space, seeing those actual artifacts, seeing, for example, the pen that Lee signed that surrender document with, has a power to excite an interest in children that you cannot replicate in a classroom. And teachers are honest about that. They say you can bring a spark to it that can excite a child who never previously thought they had any interest in history. Come to the museum, see a cannon, hold a musket, see that pen. That's very inspirational for an awful lot of children.
Excuse me, can you suggest this in your pockets?
Yes.
It's causing the interference.
Okay. Can you all hear me at the back? Okay. I mentioned earlier that history has been under assault in this country and in the United Kingdom as well. The Civil War is controversial. Civil wars tend to be, but it adopted a new controversy in recent years. Statues were up in Richmond, statues came down in Richmond. There was a lot of angst about all kinds of things. So we consciously decided to do what historians ordinarily should do all the time, and adopted the idea that in everything we do, whether it's publications or lectures or public programs or any public pronouncements, we would endeavor to understand the past as the past knew itself. Not from the vantage point of today, not with, oh, why didn't you do X, Y, and Z in the past? We know them to be wrong today. To do it from that perspective that I said at the beginning. People who entered the Civil War did not know there was going to be 3 constitutional amendments. They didn't think it would be over, didn't think it would be 4 long years. So with this to inform what it is we do, we have found It provides critics with very little ammunition because we're all about the evidence. What does the evidence suggest? There's no editorializing from the perspective of the present. One good example to demonstrate understanding the past as the past knew itself is small unit tactics in the Civil War. Any infantry veterans here? Really? That's the first audience I've spoken to without any infantry veterans. Okay. Essentially, and you know this probably better than I, Civil War battles are fought in a certain fashion that reflect a number of things. The range of the weapons deployed, the ability to command men in the din and confusion of battle. So battles are fought at much closer range with units lumped together very closely to maximize the impact of those weapons. No modern infantry unit would fight in this fashion. They have lightweight weapons, greater range. They disperse rather than come together, minimize the target for the opponent. Understanding the battle, how battles were fought 160 years ago from the perspective of those that fought them and the limitations of the technology and the communications is a way to understand the past as the past knew itself. If we were to sit here and say, look at these idiots, why are they grouping together? Why don't they spread out? Why don't they fire from further apart? Well, they didn't have the weapons, they didn't have the training, they didn't have the communications. You have to understand history from the perspective of those people for whom it wasn't history, but it was the present. That has worked well for us. It has kept us out of the firing line of a lot of critics who have attacked other institutions that try to keep history alive. And there's another example. These guys are actually, this is a reenactment in Appomattox, so they're even closer than they would have been, but I think hopefully you get the point. So one of our big initiatives is something called the Civil War and the Remaking of America, looking at the way in which the conflict came about, how it happened, and what are the ongoing consequences. The Impending Crisis is our principal temporary exhibition that looks at the origins of the war with some of our most fascinating artifacts. The star on the right was, we have a lot of ripped flags, interestingly enough. Star on the right was ripped from the Stars and Stripes flag that flew over the Capitol in Richmond, Virginia on the day that secession was announced in Richmond, the day that Virginia seceded. The temporary exhibition, The Impending Crisis, how do civil wars happen? How do any wars happen? Winston Churchill once said, there is nothing civil about a civil war, and he was absolutely right. There is a peculiarly intense vitriolic component to civil wars. We distill down the exhibition with a simple question: what would it take you, Americans today, what idea, what cause would it take you to raise your hand against your neighbor? What would it take? That's how we began that, and that we have found is very accessible for a lot of people who couldn't really imagine fighting their neighbor. How can you help with the American Civil War Museum? Come and visit us. We produce a quarterly magazine. Here it is. We call it Ironclad, a benefit of membership of the museum. If you're interested in becoming a member, I've brought a load of propaganda material and back copies of the magazine. And the magazine is really, it's about Civil War scholarship. It talks about the museum, the American Civil War Museum, but there's all of good quality scholarship from top scholars. Oh, and that is the end. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are back issues of the Ironclad available online digitally?
They are available
Excellent.
online,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
And as I said, I've got a host of back issues in actuality as well. If you have any questions, happy to answer them. Yes, sir.
Winston Churchill visited the Civil War battlefields. He made some comments about the war could have ended different. You ever read that on the internet?
You know, I have read a little bit. Churchill is fascinated by military history generally, as I'm sure you know, and especially fascinated by the Civil War. I think he went to Gettysburg on several occasions. On one occasion, he went with Eisenhower and recited all kinds of stats and data to President Eisenhower as they were driving around. Churchill wrote a fascinating counterfactual on the Battle of Gettysburg, the details of which I'm struggling to remember. But it may be on our website actually. But yeah, Churchill very interested in the Civil War, and in fact, one of our most popular programs in the last couple of years was an individual who came in and spoke about Winston Churchill and the Civil War. And I think that speaks to the enduring fascination for the wider world as well as Americans concerning the American Civil War.
Of course, his mother, Jenny Jerome, was American.
That's right, she was.
She was quite the gal, I hear.
That is an understatement from what I hear, from Brooklyn, New York. Winston Churchill famously said that I myself am the product of an Anglo-American relationship, special relationship. Anyway, yes, sir.
Of all the museums for which you have been director, what's your favorite?
Favorite museum? I'd have to say the American Civil War Museum. I actually think the Civil War Museum, because all of the things we do is grounded in that collection. The artifacts that were the props of the war. And no museum I've worked at or worked for has had anything like that collection. As I said, we actively try and collect, and there's an awful lot of Civil War artifacts still out there in people's homes, in attics and things. When you can see the pen that Lee used to sign that surrender document, see the scraps of the flag that flew over Fort Sumter, and its history coming to life, it's tremendous, and that's a fraction of the things we have. Yes, sir.
I was amazed since going to these Civil War groups, having the battles are in the state of Virginia. It's all over. And I would say we have more battles here than any other state.
I think that's the case. There is a statistic that I'm not precise on, but it's something akin to 85% of all casualties in the American Civil War are incurred within 100 miles, 110 miles of Richmond. So Richmond and Virginia is the epicenter of the conflict. It really is. And you can, any drive around Virginia, the battlefields everywhere, big and small. Yes, sir.
Just a basic question, what's the hours of the museum and so forth?
I should have that on my slide, shouldn't I? The museum is open 10 till 5, 360. We close Christmas Day, and I think that's the only day we're closed actually. Yeah, all three sites are open with that degree of frequency.
Whereabouts is this located? I've been to Richmond many times, but I don't know exactly which part of Richmond this is.
So we have two sites in Richmond. One is the White House of the Confederacy, which is on Clay Street.
Okay,
And,
I know about where that is.
Right, and the other is on the old Tredegar Ironworks on Tredegar Street down by the river.
Okay.
So I think that part of Richmond was a quiet part of town until very recently. There's a lot of new development. Richmond has just built an amphitheater, which is right behind us. So it really is at the eye of the storm in Richmond, which ultimately I think will be a good thing. But there's a lot of construction traffic at the moment.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Where does your funding come from?
Our funding, in all honesty, comes from people like you who care about the Civil War, who become a member and support what it is we do. We have a small endowment that looks after the White House. The Commonwealth of Virginia helps with education programs, but it's completely privately funded. Getting nothing from the federal government whatsoever, which once upon a time was a bad thing. It's probably a good thing at the moment. So if people who care about the Civil War, admissions, revenues, donations, and memberships.
How much does it cost to go?
At Tredegar, it's $18. $18 per person. And I think 13 at Appomattox and 12 at the White House. White House, and you buy a ticket where you get 3 entries for a lot less money.
Discount for members?
And a discount for members, yes. Yeah, if you're a member, you get a discount. And if you're a member, you get in for free. And a discount in the gift shop. Yes, sir.
So with the education component and school children, is there an age group that you target or that you find are most receptive to the program?
Our funding from the Commonwealth of Virginia is K through 12, but in Virginia, I think mostly the fourth grade is when they look at the Civil War, so we get a lot of fourth grade children. We also get a lot of groups of high schoolers who are sophomores, because they look again at the Civil War at that juncture, which is all good for us. Our goal is that every K through 12 student in the Commonwealth of Virginia will have an opportunity at some juncture through their K through 12 career to engage with the Civil War Museum, whether we go to them and we do a lot of outreach or they come to us. And I've seen, we've got some great educators, you see kids light up with interest when they see those artifacts. We do some living history things, got guys who reenact Confederate infantrymen and Union infantrymen, show them the different weapons, show them how they would have fought slightly differently. And we have a cannon and appomattox we fire as frequently as possible, small arms demonstrations, and that kind of stuff really does excites older people as well as kids.
What do you
Yes.
see as the future of Civil War research over the next 10, 20 years? Oftentimes there are different themes that emerge over time. What do you think the future theme might be, or new look at history?
You know, that's a good question. I think there are peaks and troughs of interest in the Civil War. I think there was a bit of a trough after the 160th, 150th. I think it's picking back up a little bit. I think there's been an awful lot of focus on the non-military pieces for a very long time, social history. I would think that that's going to come back a little more, the pure military history component of Civil War scholarship. We have seen that if you do something on the economics of the Civil War, there's a lot of interest. But if you do something on Grant versus Lee and the generals and the fighting, that's some of the most popular things we do. So we're into the course of the war at the moment, and we're looking at the battles and the generals and the leaders, and that's very, very popular. As I said, there is I think a lot of interest in the Civil War is publicly quiet, but I think it's still there, not as public as it used to be, perhaps. Yes, sir.
Churchill Westminster College, the Iron Curtain speech. Westminster Cathedral is Britain.
It is, yes.
What is the connection? And I know the museum's in the church.
At the end of World War II, it sounds like a long answer, but I'll get to the point sooner or later. At the end of World War II, July of 1945, war against Germany is over, war against Japan is going on. The British hold a general election, and Churchill loses, and he's out of power, he's out of office. At that point, the president of Westminster College says, you know what, we need a lecturer in our John Finley Green lecture series. Let's roll all the dice and invite Winston Churchill. So they invite Churchill, and they cleverly get a Westminster alumnus, Major General Harry Vaughan is his name, military aide to President Truman, who's a Missourian. Truman writes on the bottom of the letter of invitation, "This is a great school in my home state. Please say you'll do it." The lecture, "I'll introduce you. Best regards, Harry Truman."
Wow.
And Churchill, out of office, but still with a message to deliver, says, the incumbent president's going to introduce me. If I go to Westminster, the eyes of the world will be on me, and I'll warn everyone about the threat of the Soviet Union. And that's exactly what he does with the Iron Curtain speech.
That's a great history lesson there.
There's a lot of pieces to that, but yeah, March 1946.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Any other questions pertinent to the Civil War Museum? Any answers?
Thank you all for great questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you go, please remember to visit our website often, civilwarstudygroup.org. We make every attempt on a regular basis to provide informative content. Thank you for visiting, and God bless.